My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you about the most dramatic wedding moment that no one saw coming, including me. It happened during what should have been the happiest day of my life, when my new mother-in-law decided to publicly humiliate me in front of 200 guests. But sometimes, the truth has a way of turning the tables in the most unexpected ways, and karma has a perfect sense of timing. This story begins 2 years ago when I met James at a coffee shop near my office. I was a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm, working my way up the corporate ladder through 60-hour weeks and relentless dedication. James was a software engineer at a tech startup, equally driven and ambitious. We bonded over our shared love of hiking, our mutual obsession with finding the perfect espresso, and our similar backgrounds of working-class families who had instilled strong values about earning everything we achieved. The coffee shop where we met had become my daily refuge from the high-pressure world of financial analysis. I would arrive every morning at 7:30, order my usual double-shot Cortado, and spend 20 minutes reviewing market reports before heading to the office. James had apparently developed a similar routine, and we began exchanging polite nods and small talk about the weather or current events. What drew me to James initially wasn't his appearance, though he was certainly attractive in an understated way, but rather his genuine curiosity about the world around him. He would ask thoughtful questions about financial markets, showing real interest in understanding economic trends and their implications for ordinary people. Unlike many men I had dated, he never seemed intimidated by my career or tried to demonstrate his own expertise by mansplaining concepts I already understood perfectly. Our first actual conversation lasted 4 to 5 minutes and covered everything from artificial intelligence to environmental policy to the best hiking trails within driving distance of the city. James had a way of listening that made me feel heard and valued, asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely engaged with what I was saying rather than simply waiting for his turn to speak. When James finally asked me out for dinner, he suggested a small Ethiopian restaurant that he had discovered during his exploration of the city's diverse neighborhoods. The choice revealed something important about his character. He was more interested in authentic experiences than impressive settings, more focused on genuine conversation than social status. The restaurant was modest but served incredible food, and we spent 3 hours talking about our backgrounds, our career goals, and our shared love of outdoor adventures. I learned that evening that James had grown up in what he described vaguely as a comfortable middle-class family, with parents who had emphasized education and hard work. He spoke about his childhood with fondness but without excessive detail, mentioning family camping trips and weekend projects but avoiding specifics about their living situation or financial circumstances. I assumed this discretion reflected a healthy boundary between personal and family privacy rather than any attempt to conceal significant wealth. James's approach to dating was refreshingly egalitarian and thoughtful. He insisted on splitting restaurant bills, alternated with me in planning activities, and never tried to impress me with expensive gestures or exclusive experiences. Our early dates involved hiking trails, farmers markets, cooking meals together at my apartment, and attending free cultural events around the city. I appreciated this approach because it allowed our relationship to develop based on genuine compatibility rather than financial dynamics. The first few months of our relationship unfolded naturally and authentically, with both of us maintaining our independence while gradually building deeper emotional intimacy. James respected my demanding work schedule and never pressured me to prioritize our relationship over my career goals. Similarly, I supported his dedication to his startup and understood that building a successful technology company required significant time and energy. We discovered that we shared similar values about money, work, and relationships that had been shaped by our modest upbringings. Both of us had worked multiple jobs during college to help pay for our education, and we both understood the satisfaction that comes from earning your own success rather than relying on family assistance. We talked about our long-term goals with excitement and optimism, planning hiking trips, career advancement strategies, and eventually, a shared future together. James's apartment reflected his practical and unpretentious approach to life. It was clean and comfortable but furnished with pieces that looked like they had been chosen for functionality rather than style. His kitchen was well equipped because he enjoyed cooking, but the appliances were standard models rather than high-end brands. His bookshelf was filled with technical manuals, science fiction novels, and hiking guides, revealing interests that were intellectual and adventurous rather than status-conscious. The revelation about James's family wealth came gradually, through small details that initially seemed insignificant but eventually accumulated into a larger picture. He would mention expensive family vacations with casual indifference, reference private schools and exclusive summer camps without seeming to realize that these experiences were unusual, and occasionally display knowledge about luxury goods or exclusive experiences that seemed inconsistent with his modest lifestyle. The first major clue came when James mentioned that his parents lived in a gated community, but he described this detail as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than a marker of significant wealth. When I expressed curiosity about visiting his family, he seemed reluctant and evasive, claiming that his parents could be judgmental and that he wanted to be sure about our relationship before introducing family complications. Our relationship developed naturally and authentically. We split bills evenly, took turns planning dates, and supported each other's career goals without any expectation of financial gain. James lived in a modest apartment and drove a reliable but unremarkable car. I had my own small place and a sensible sedan that I had saved for months to buy. Neither of us was wealthy, but we were both financially responsible and independent. What I didn't know during those early months of dating was that James's family had money, significant money. He never mentioned it, never flaunted it, and certainly never used it to impress anyone. He had grown up in a wealthy suburb, attended private schools, and had access to trust funds and family investments that could have made his life much easier. But James had made a conscious decision to live on his own earnings and build his own success, partly because he wanted to prove himself independently and partly because he had seen how family money could complicate relationships and corrupt people's motivations. I learned about James's family wealth gradually, through small details that didn't initially add up to the full picture. He would mention expensive family vacations from his childhood, or reference private schools and summer camps that I knew were costly. When he talked about his parents, he would describe their house vaguely, mentioning that it was in an affluent neighborhood but not elaborating on its size or grandeur. He spoke about his mother Patricia's charity work and his father Robert's business success, but always in modest terms that downplayed their actual financial status. The first time I met Patricia and Robert was 6 months into my relationship with James. He had been reluctant to arrange the meeting, claiming that his parents could be judgmental and that he wanted to be sure about our relationship before introducing family complications. When we finally had dinner at their house, I understood why James had been hesitant. The house was a sprawling mansion in the most exclusive part of town, with manicured grounds, expensive artwork, and furnishings that probably cost more than my annual salary. Patricia greeted me with polite coolness, the kind of artificial warmth that wealthy people often use when they're trying to be gracious but are actually evaluating your worth. She asked pointed questions about my background, my education, my career goals, and my family's circumstances. Her questions were phrased diplomatically, but the underlying message was clear. She was assessing whether I was suitable for her son, and she had already reached some preliminary conclusions that weren't favorable. Robert was more genuinely welcoming, engaging me in conversations about current events and showing interest in my work in finance. He seemed impressed by my knowledge of market trends and investment strategies, and he asked thoughtful questions about my career aspirations. However, I could sense that he was also evaluating me, trying to determine whether I was genuinely accomplished or simply putting on an act to impress his family. That first dinner was awkward but not disastrous. Patricia maintained her polite facade throughout the evening, and Robert was generally pleasant and engaging. James seemed tense during the entire visit, clearly worried about how the meeting would go and whether his parents would approve of me. After we left, he apologized for his mother's coolness and assured me that she needed time to warm up to new people. Over the following months, my relationship with Patricia remained strained despite my best efforts to connect with her. I brought thoughtful gifts when we visited, remembered details about her interests and activities, and always expressed appreciation for her hospitality. But Patricia seemed determined to find fault with everything about me, from my clothes and hairstyle to my career choices and family background. She would make subtle comments about my modest upbringing, suggesting that I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of managing significant wealth or the responsibilities that came with social prominence. She would reference expensive items or exclusive experiences casually, as if testing whether I would be impressed or intimidated by displays of affluence. She seemed particularly interested in my financial situation, asking indirect questions about my salary, my savings, and my expectations for the future. James was aware of his mother's behavior and tried to shield me from her worst impulses. He would intervene when her comments became too pointed, and he made it clear to his parents that he wouldn't tolerate disrespect toward me. However, Patricia was skilled at operating just below the threshold of obvious rudeness, making her criticism subtle enough that confronting her directly would seem like an overreaction. Despite the tension with Patricia, my relationship with James continued to flourish. We moved in together after a year of dating, splitting the rent and expenses equally despite James's access to family money. He continued to live on his engineering salary, refusing financial help from his parents and building his career through his own efforts. I respected his independence and his commitment to earning his own success, and I never asked him about his family's wealth or expressed any interest in benefiting from it. The engagement came 18 months into our relationship, during a hiking trip to our favorite mountain trail. James proposed with a beautiful but modestly sized ring that he had saved for months to afford. It wasn't the massive diamond that his family wealth could have easily purchased, but it was perfect because it represented his own work and his genuine feelings for me. I said yes enthusiastically, thrilled to be marrying a man who shared my values and who loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide for him. When we announced our engagement to James's parents, their reactions were mixed. Robert congratulated us warmly and seemed genuinely pleased about our decision to marry. Patricia's response was more restrained, offering formal congratulations while making it clear that she had reservations about the marriage. She immediately began asking questions about our wedding plans, our financial arrangements, and our expectations for the future. The wedding planning process became a battlefield where Patricia tried to assert control and influence while James and I attempted to create the celebration we actually wanted. Patricia insisted that we needed a large, elaborate wedding befitting the family's social status, while we preferred a smaller, more intimate ceremony focused on our closest friends and family members. She wanted to invite hundreds of her business associates and social connections, while we wanted to keep the guest list limited to people who actually knew and cared about us. Patricia also tried to influence other aspects of the wedding planning, from the venue and catering to the flowers and music. She would make suggestions that were actually demands, framed as helpful advice but delivered with the expectation of compliance. When we politely declined her recommendations, she would become passive-aggressive, suggesting that we were being ungrateful or short-sighted. The most contentious issue was Patricia's insistence on paying for the wedding. She argued that the family's reputation required a certain level of elegance and that James and I couldn't afford the kind of celebration that would be appropriate. We declined her offer repeatedly, explaining that we wanted to pay for our own wedding and create something that reflected our own tastes and values. Patricia interpreted our refusal as evidence of stubbornness and ingratitude, and she began making comments about my influence over James and my failure to appreciate the family's generosity. What Patricia didn't know, and what James and I had agreed never to reveal, was that we were actually quite comfortable financially. I had received a significant promotion at work, and James had gotten substantial stock options from his startup that were performing well. We could afford a beautiful wedding without any family assistance, and we preferred to maintain our independence rather than accept help that came with strings attached. The final weeks before the wedding were particularly stressful because Patricia escalated her campaign to undermine our plans and assert her authority. She would call James constantly with new demands and suggestions, often becoming emotional and claiming that we were embarrassing the family with our modest choices. She recruited Robert to pressure James into accepting her vision for the wedding, creating tension within the family that added stress to what should have been a joyful time. Patricia also began making more direct comments about her concerns regarding our marriage. She suggested that I was marrying James for financial security rather than love, pointing to my modest background as evidence that I was motivated by money rather than genuine affection. She would make these accusations indirectly, through questions about my intentions and observations about the challenges of marrying across economic classes. 3 weeks before the wedding, Patricia crossed a line that fundamentally changed our relationship. She called me directly, bypassing James entirely, and asked to meet for lunch to discuss some important matters. I agreed, hoping that we could finally address the tension between us and find a way to move forward as family members. The lunch was a disaster from the beginning. Patricia had clearly planned the conversation carefully, and she wasted no time in launching into her real agenda. She told me that she believed I was marrying James for his family's money and that she was prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect her son from what she saw as a predatory relationship. She offered me money to break up with James, starting with $50,000 and eventually increasing the offer to $200,000. I was stunned by her proposal and insulted by her assumptions about my character and motivations. I told her firmly that I loved James and that I had no interest in his family's money, which was why we had refused all offers of financial assistance. Patricia dismissed my protestations, arguing that everyone had a price and that I was simply being strategic about maximizing my eventual payout. The conversation became increasingly heated as Patricia revealed the extent of her investigation into my background. She had researched my family's financial history, my college loans, my salary history, and even my credit score. She presented this information as evidence that I was financially desperate and therefore motivated to marry into wealth. She seemed genuinely convinced that I was running an elaborate long-term con designed to gain access to the family's assets. I left that lunch feeling angry, hurt, and concerned about how Patricia's hostility would affect my marriage to James. I told James about the conversation immediately, and he was furious with his mother's behavior. He confronted Patricia directly, making it clear that her interference was unacceptable and that any future attempts to undermine our relationship would result in him cutting contact with his parents entirely. Patricia's response to James's ultimatum was to escalate her campaign rather than retreat. She began calling him multiple times per day, alternating between emotional appeals about protecting the family and angry demands that he reconsider his decision to marry me. She recruited other family members to pressure James, claiming that I was manipulating him and that he was making a terrible mistake that would ruin his life. 2 weeks before the wedding, Patricia's behavior reached a new low when she began spreading rumors about me to their social circle. She told friends and family members that I was a gold digger who had targeted James specifically because of his wealth, and that the family was being torn apart by my manipulative behavior. These rumors eventually reached some of our wedding guests, creating an atmosphere of speculation and judgment that poisoned what should have been a celebratory time. James was devastated by his mother's actions and considered canceling the wedding rather than subjecting me to further humiliation. I convinced him that we shouldn't let Patricia's behavior derail our plans, and that we needed to move forward with our marriage despite her opposition. However, the stress of dealing with her constant interference was taking a toll on both of us, and we were both exhausted by the ongoing conflict. 1 week before the wedding, Patricia's desperation reached its peak in a way that none of us expected. James and I received a voicemail from her that was unlike anything we had ever heard before. Patricia was crying, almost incoherent with emotion, and she was begging us for financial help with a crisis that had apparently just emerged. In the voicemail, Patricia explained that Robert's business was facing serious financial difficulties due to some failed investments and market downturns. They were at risk of losing their house, their cars, and most of their assets unless they could raise $2 million within the next month. She begged James to access his trust fund and provide them with emergency financial assistance, promising to pay him back as soon as Robert's business recovered. The voicemail was devastating in its raw emotion and desperation. Patricia, who had spent months portraying herself as financially superior and questioning my motives, was revealing that her own family was facing potential bankruptcy. She admitted that they had been living beyond their means for years, maintaining an expensive lifestyle through credit and loans that were now coming due. The wealthy, stable family that she had used as evidence of her son's desirability was actually a house of cards that was collapsing under financial pressure. James and I listened to the voicemail multiple times, trying to process the magnitude of Patricia's deception and hypocrisy. The woman who had accused me of being a gold digger was actually facing her own financial crisis, and was now desperately seeking help from the son she had tried to turn against me. The family wealth that she had used as a weapon against me was apparently largely fictitious, maintained through debt and financial manipulation. James was torn between anger at his mother's hypocrisy and concern for his parents' genuine financial crisis. He wanted to help them avoid bankruptcy, but he was also furious about their deception and their treatment of me. We spent hours discussing how to respond to Patricia's plea, weighing our moral obligations against our desire to protect ourselves from further manipulation. Ultimately, James decided to provide some financial assistance to his parents, but with strict conditions about their future behavior toward me and our marriage. He agreed to help them avoid immediate bankruptcy, but he made it clear that this assistance was contingent on Patricia publicly apologizing for her treatment of me and committing to respectful behavior going forward. Patricia agreed to James's conditions, promising to apologize and to treat me with respect. However, her apology was half-hearted and clearly motivated by financial necessity rather than genuine remorse. She continued to make subtle comments about our relationship, and it was obvious that she had not actually changed her opinion about my motivations for marrying James. The wedding day arrived with all the tension and conflict still simmering beneath the surface. Patricia had honored her agreement to avoid public confrontation, but her resentment was obvious to anyone who knew the history of our relationship. She smiled for photographs and made polite conversation with guests, but her body language and tone conveyed her continued disapproval of the marriage. The ceremony itself was beautiful and meaningful, focused on our love for each other and our commitment to building a life together. James and I exchanged vows that we had written ourselves, promising to support each other's dreams and to face whatever challenges came our way as a team. For a few hours, we were able to forget about family drama and focus on the joy of our union. The reception began smoothly, with dinner, dancing, and speeches from friends and family members. My parents spoke warmly about James and welcomed him into our family with genuine affection. James's father gave a gracious speech about his happiness for our marriage and his confidence in our future together. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, and I began to relax and enjoy what should have been the happiest day of my life. The turning point came during the traditional toasts, when Patricia stood up unexpectedly and asked for the microphone. James and I exchanged worried glances, but we couldn't refuse her request without creating a scene in front of our guests. Patricia began her speech with what seemed like conventional congratulations, speaking about her joy in welcoming a new daughter-in-law and her hopes for our happiness. But then Patricia's tone shifted, and she began making comments that were clearly designed to humiliate me in front of our wedding guests. She spoke about the challenges of marrying into a family with different values and expectations, suggesting that some people might be motivated by factors other than love. She made references to financial compatibility and the importance of understanding what marriage truly meant beyond its material benefits. The guests began to look uncomfortable as Patricia's comments became more pointed and obviously directed at me. She spoke about gold diggers and women who targeted successful men for their wealth, making it clear to everyone in the room that she was describing what she believed to be my motivations for marrying James. Her speech was a deliberate character assassination disguised as wedding toast, designed to humiliate me in front of everyone we cared about. James started to stand up to intervene, but I placed my hand on his arm and shook my head. I had endured months of Patricia's subtle and not-so-subtle attacks on my character, and I was not going to let her destroy our wedding day with her poisonous accusations. I stood up calmly and asked Patricia if I could respond to her lovely toast, taking the microphone with a smile that probably looked more confident than I felt. I thanked Patricia for her words and told the guests that I wanted to share something that would help them understand the true nature of our family relationships. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system, explaining that I had a voicemail that would provide important context for Patricia's concerns about financial motivations in marriage. I played Patricia's desperate voicemail for the entire wedding reception, letting our 200 guests hear her tearful pleas for financial assistance and her admissions about her family's financial crisis. The room fell completely silent as Patricia's voice filled the space, begging for money from the son she had just accused of marrying a gold digger. Her hypocrisy was exposed in the most public and undeniable way possible. When the voicemail ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Patricia looked devastated, realizing that her carefully constructed image of wealthy superiority had been destroyed in front of everyone she knew. The guests stared at her in shock, understanding immediately that the woman who had just accused me of marrying for money was actually the one facing financial desperation. I handed the microphone back to Patricia and told her that I hoped this clarified any confusion about who in our family was actually motivated by financial concerns. I explained to the guests that James and I had built our relationship on mutual love and respect, and that we were financially independent people who had never needed or wanted help from his family. I thanked everyone for celebrating our marriage and invited them to continue enjoying the reception. The aftermath of my response was immediate and dramatic. Several guests approached me to express their support and their shock at Patricia's behavior. Others surrounded Patricia, some offering comfort and others clearly expressing their disapproval of her actions. The wedding reception continued, but the dynamic had shifted completely, with Patricia's credibility and social standing severely damaged. James was initially concerned that I had escalated the conflict by playing the voicemail publicly, but he also acknowledged that Patricia had forced my hand by attacking me so brazenly during our wedding. He supported my decision to defend myself and made it clear to his mother that her behavior had been unacceptable and embarrassing to the entire family. In the weeks following the wedding, the fallout from the reception continued to reverberate through James's social circle. Many of Patricia's friends and acquaintances reached out to express their support for me and their disapproval of her behavior. Some people who had heard her rumors about me before the wedding now understood that she had been projecting her own financial desperation onto our relationship. Patricia attempted to repair her reputation by claiming that her voicemail had been taken out of context and that her financial crisis was temporary and not as serious as it had seemed. However, the damage to her credibility was irreversible, and most people understood that her accusations against me had been motivated by her own guilt and shame about her family's financial problems. The financial assistance that James provided to his parents did help them avoid immediate bankruptcy, but their long-term financial situation remained precarious. They were forced to downsize their lifestyle significantly, selling their mansion and most of their luxury possessions to pay off debts and reduce their expenses. The wealthy lifestyle that Patricia had used to justify her sense of superiority was revealed to be unsustainable and largely financed through borrowing. Our marriage has thrived despite the dramatic beginning and the ongoing tension with Patricia. James and I have built a strong partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love for each other. We've both continued to advance in our careers, and we're financially secure through our own efforts rather than family wealth. We've proven that our relationship was never about money and that we're capable of building a successful life together independently. Patricia's relationship with James has improved somewhat over time, but it has never fully recovered from her behavior during our engagement and wedding. She has apologized more sincerely for her actions, acknowledging that her financial stress had caused her to act irrationally and unfairly toward me. However, the trust that was broken during that period has been difficult to rebuild, and our relationship remains cordial but distant. The experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself and not allowing others to define my character or motivations. Patricia's attacks on my integrity were painful and stressful, but they also forced me to develop resilience and confidence in defending my own worth. I learned that sometimes the best response to false accusations is simply to let the truth speak for itself. I also learned about the corrosive effects of financial insecurity and the ways that money can distort people's perceptions and behavior. Patricia's own financial problems had made her paranoid about other people's motivations, causing her to project her own desperation onto our relationship. Her accusations against me were really reflections of her own shame and fear about her family's precarious financial situation. The wedding day confrontation became something of a legend in our social circle, with people often referencing it as an example of how karma can deliver justice in the most unexpected ways. Patricia's attempt to humiliate me backfired spectacularly, exposing her own hypocrisy and damaging her reputation far more than her accusations could ever have damaged mine. Looking back on that day, I'm proud of how I handled the situation and defended myself against unfair attacks. Playing Patricia's voicemail was a risk that could have backfired, but it was also a necessary response to her public assault on my character. Sometimes standing up for yourself requires taking bold action, even when the stakes are high and the outcome is uncertain. James and I often talk about how that experience strengthened our relationship and clarified our values as a couple. We learned that we could face adversity together and support each other through difficult family dynamics. We also learned the importance of financial independence and the value of building our own success rather than relying on inherited wealth or family assistance. Today, we're happier than ever and grateful for the lessons we learned during that challenging period. Our marriage is built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine partnership, and we've proven to ourselves and others that love and compatibility matter more than financial status or family approval. Patricia's accusations were ultimately irrelevant because our relationship was never about money in the first place. The voicemail that exposed Patricia's hypocrisy is still saved on my phone, not because I want to use it as a weapon, but because it serves as a reminder of how important it is to stand up for truth and justice. Sometimes people will try to tear you down to make themselves feel better, but the truth has a way of emerging and protecting those who live with integrity and authenticity. That wedding day taught me that karma doesn't always work in mysterious ways. Sometimes it works exactly as it should, exposing hypocrisy and protecting innocent people from unfair attacks. Patricia's laughter at my expense was short-lived, but the lesson about standing up for yourself and letting truth prevail will last a lifetime. The months leading up to that dramatic confrontation were filled with subtle psychological warfare that I'm only now beginning to fully understand. Patricia's campaign against me was methodical and calculated, designed to undermine my confidence and isolate me from James's support system. She would make comments that seemed innocent on the surface but carried deeper implications about my worthiness and motivations. During family gatherings, Patricia would often steer conversations toward topics that highlighted economic differences between our families. She would discuss expensive purchases, exclusive travel destinations, and high-end social events with the clear intention of making me feel out of place and inadequate. When I didn't respond with the awe or envy she expected, she would escalate these displays of wealth until they became almost comically obvious. One particularly memorable incident occurred during a dinner party at their home, where Patricia spent 20 minutes describing the provenance of various pieces of artwork and furniture. She would mention the astronomical prices paid for these items, the exclusive auction houses where they were purchased, and the famous previous owners who had possessed them. The entire performance was designed to establish her cultural superiority and make me feel like an outsider who couldn't possibly appreciate such refinement. What Patricia didn't realize was that my work in finance had given me extensive knowledge about art markets, luxury goods, and investment-grade collectibles. I could have engaged with her on these topics knowledgeably, but I chose not to because I recognized her behavior as a test designed to expose what she believed to be my gold-digging tendencies. By remaining politely interested but not overly impressed, I frustrated her attempts to categorize me as either envious or calculating. The wedding planning period revealed new dimensions of Patricia's controlling personality and her determination to assert dominance over every aspect of our celebration. She had strong opinions about everything from the color scheme and floral arrangements to the music selection and menu choices. More importantly, she seemed to view our wedding as an opportunity to showcase her family's status and social connections rather than a celebration of James's and my love for each other. Patricia's insistence on inviting hundreds of her business associates and social acquaintances created significant tension, because James and I preferred a more intimate gathering focused on people who actually knew and cared about us. She argued that the family's reputation required a certain level of social participation, and that failing to invite important community members would be seen as a snub that could damage future business relationships. The guest list became a battleground where every addition or deletion was scrutinized for its social and political implications. Patricia would present lists of people who simply had to be invited, while James and I would counter with our preference for keeping the celebration small and meaningful. These negotiations often became heated, with Patricia suggesting that our desire for intimacy was actually evidence of shame about our backgrounds or fear of comparison with more successful couples. The venue selection process was equally contentious, with Patricia pushing for the most expensive and exclusive location available while James and I preferred a more modest setting that reflected our values and budget. Patricia argued that anything less than the finest venue would reflect poorly on the family's status and suggest that James was marrying beneath his station. She seemed genuinely convinced that our wedding would be judged primarily on its cost and exclusivity rather than its meaning and authenticity. The financial negotiations around wedding expenses became increasingly complex and manipulative as Patricia offered to pay for specific elements of the celebration, but only if they met her standards for quality and expense. These offers came with implicit expectations about gratitude and compliance that made accepting her assistance feel like surrendering our independence and autonomy. What made these conflicts particularly frustrating was Patricia's ability to present her demands as helpful suggestions while making it clear that she expected compliance. She had perfected the art of emotional manipulation, using tears, guilt trips, and appeals to family harmony to pressure James into accepting her vision for our wedding. When these tactics failed, she would escalate to more direct threats about withdrawing family support or creating social embarrassment. The stress of dealing with Patricia's constant interference began to affect my relationship with James in ways that concerned me deeply. He was caught between loyalty to his mother and support for our autonomy as a couple, and this conflict was clearly taking an emotional toll on him. He would often seem exhausted after phone calls with Patricia, and he began to dread family interactions that had previously been sources of joy and connection. I found myself walking on eggshells around Patricia, carefully monitoring my words and behavior to avoid giving her ammunition for her accusations about my character and motivations. This constant vigilance was exhausting and degrading, forcing me to second-guess natural responses and authentic emotions in favor of calculated performances designed to deflect criticism. The revelation of Patricia's financial crisis through her desperate voicemail completely recontextualized our entire relationship and her behavior toward me. Suddenly, her obsession with money and financial security made perfect sense as projections of her own fears and insecurities. Her accusations about my gold-digging motivations were really confessions of her own desperate need for financial assistance from the very family wealth she had used as a weapon against me. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. Patricia, who had spent months portraying herself as financially superior and questioning my motivations for marrying James, was actually living in a house of cards that was collapsing under the weight of unsustainable debt and failed investments. The mansion, the luxury cars, the expensive artwork, and the elaborate lifestyle were all financed through borrowing rather than actual wealth. The decision to play Patricia's voicemail at our wedding reception was not made lightly or in anger, but rather as a calculated response to her public attack on my character. I had anticipated that she might use the reception as an opportunity to humiliate me, and I had prepared for this possibility by saving her desperate plea for financial assistance. When she chose to attack me during her toast, she gave me no choice but to defend myself with the truth. The immediate aftermath of playing the voicemail was dramatic and satisfying, but it also created long-term consequences for family relationships that continue to this day. Patricia's public humiliation was complete and devastating, but it also made future reconciliation more difficult because she could never fully escape the shame of having her hypocrisy exposed so publicly and dramatically. Many guests at the reception later told me that they had suspected something was wrong with Patricia's behavior toward me, but they hadn't understood the full scope of her hostility until they witnessed her wedding toast. Several people mentioned that they had found her previous comments about gold diggers and financial motivations to be inappropriate and puzzling, but the voicemail provided context that made her behavior finally make sense. The social fallout from the reception extended far beyond our immediate family, affecting Patricia's standing in the community and her ability to maintain the social connections that had been so important to her sense of identity. Many of her friends and acquaintances reached out to express their support for me and their shock at her behavior, while others simply distanced themselves from the family rather than become involved in ongoing drama. The financial assistance that James provided to his parents was substantial but came with strict conditions about transparency, accountability, and future behavior. James insisted on reviewing their debts and expenses in detail, working with financial advisors to develop sustainable budgets, and receiving regular reports on their progress toward financial stability. This level of oversight was humiliating for Patricia, but it was necessary to ensure that the assistance would actually solve their problems rather than simply enabling continued irresponsible spending. The process of helping his parents through their financial crisis was emotionally difficult for James because it forced him to confront the reality that his family's wealth had always been more appearance than substance. The lifestyle he had grown up with, the privileges he had rejected, and the social status his family had used to justify their sense of superiority were all built on debt and financial manipulation rather than actual success. Our marriage has flourished in the years since that dramatic wedding reception, built on the solid foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and proven ability to weather adversity together. We've both continued to advance in our careers, achieving professional success through our own efforts and building genuine financial security through careful planning and hard work. We've proven to ourselves and others that our relationship was never about money and that we're capable of creating a successful life independently. The experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for myself and not allowing others to define my worth based on their own insecurities and prejudices. Patricia's attacks on my integrity were painful and stressful, but they also forced me to develop resilience and confidence in defending my reputation and values. I learned that sometimes the best response to false accusations is simply to present the truth and allow people to draw their own conclusions. The wedding day confrontation has become something of a legend in our social circle, frequently referenced as an example of how karma can deliver justice in unexpected and perfectly timed ways. People often tell the story to illustrate the importance of authenticity and the dangers of making false accusations based on prejudice rather than evidence. Patricia's attempt to humiliate me backfired spectacularly, exposing her own hypocrisy and damaging her reputation far more than her accusations could ever have damaged mine. Looking back on that experience, I'm proud of how I handled the situation and defended myself against unfair attacks. Playing Patricia's voicemail was a bold and risky decision that could have been perceived as cruel or inappropriate, but it was also a necessary response to her public assault on my character and our marriage. Sometimes standing up for yourself requires taking dramatic action, even when the stakes are high and the outcome is uncertain. The story of our wedding reception has also become a source of inspiration for other people who have faced similar challenges with judgmental family members or social pressure based on economic differences. I've received messages from other women who have been accused of being gold diggers, thanking me for showing them that it's possible to defend yourself effectively against such accusations while maintaining your dignity in the face of unfair attacks. Our relationship with James's family has stabilized over the years, but it has never returned to the level of closeness that might have been possible without Patricia's initial hostility and public humiliation. We maintain polite and respectful contact, but there's an underlying tension that probably will never fully disappear. However, we've learned to manage these family dynamics without allowing them to damage our marriage or our individual well-being. The financial lessons from Patricia's crisis have also influenced our own approach to money management and long-term planning. We're committed to living within our means, building genuine wealth through savings and investments, and never using debt to maintain a lifestyle that we cannot actually afford. Patricia's example serves as a constant reminder of the dangers of prioritizing appearance over substance and the importance of financial honesty and transparency. Today, several years after that dramatic wedding day, I can honestly say that I'm grateful for the experience despite the pain and stress it caused at the time. The confrontation forced me to develop strength and resilience that have served me well in other challenging situations, and it demonstrated that truth and authenticity will ultimately prevail over deception and manipulation, even when the process is difficult and uncertain. The voicemail that exposed Patricia's desperation is still saved on my phone, not as a weapon to be used against her, but as a reminder of the importance of truth and authenticity in all relationships. It serves as evidence that people's true motivations and character will eventually be revealed, regardless of how carefully they try to conceal them behind facades and false accusations. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight for our own dignity and the right to be judged based on our actual character rather than other people's prejudices and projections. That wedding reception will always be remembered as a moment when karma delivered perfect justice, but it was also a moment when I chose to fight for my marriage and my reputation rather than accepting unfair treatment in silence. The psychological impact of Patricia's sustained campaign against me cannot be overstated. For months, I endured subtle and not-so-subtle attacks on my character, my motivations, and my worthiness to be part of their family. These attacks were particularly insidious because they were often disguised as concern for James's well-being or helpful observations about the challenges of marriage across social classes. Patricia's method of character assassination was sophisticated and calculated, designed to plant seeds of doubt without providing obvious targets for confrontation. She would make comments that seemed reasonable on the surface but carried implicit accusations about my character and intentions. When I tried to address these concerns directly, she would feign innocence and suggest that I was being overly sensitive or defensive. The constant scrutiny and evaluation was exhausting in ways that I'm still processing years later. Every interaction with Patricia felt like a performance where I was being judged on criteria that were never clearly articulated but were always shifting. I found myself second-guessing natural responses and authentic emotions, trying to anticipate her criticisms and deflect her accusations before they could gain traction. The wedding planning period intensified these dynamics exponentially, as Patricia used our celebration as a battleground for asserting her authority and demonstrating her social superiority. Every decision about the wedding became an opportunity for her to evaluate our taste, our financial priorities, and our understanding of proper social behavior. She seemed to view our wedding as a reflection of her family's status rather than a celebration of our love and commitment. The guest list negotiations revealed particularly troubling aspects of Patricia's worldview and her understanding of social relationships. She insisted that the wedding needed to include hundreds of her business associates and social connections, people who had no personal relationship with James or me but whose presence she considered essential for maintaining her family's reputation and social standing. When James and I pushed back against this approach, preferring a more intimate gathering focused on people who actually knew and cared about us, Patricia became increasingly agitated and manipulative. She would alternate between emotional appeals about family harmony and veiled threats about the social consequences of excluding important community members from our celebration. The venue selection process became another battlefield where Patricia attempted to impose her vision of what our wedding should represent. She had identified the most expensive and exclusive location in the city, a historic mansion that would have cost more than my annual salary to rent for a single evening. When we expressed preference for a more modest setting that reflected our values and budget, Patricia seemed genuinely offended by our choice. Patricia's arguments for the expensive venue revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of our relationship and our priorities. She seemed to believe that choosing a less prestigious location would reflect poorly on James's status and suggest that he was settling for someone beneath his social station. She couldn't comprehend that we valued authenticity and meaning over cost and exclusivity. The catering discussions followed similar patterns, with Patricia insisting on elaborate multi-course meals prepared by celebrity chefs while James and I preferred simpler food that would allow us to focus on our guests and our celebration. Patricia would present her suggestions as helpful advice while making it clear that she expected compliance with her vision of appropriate wedding entertainment. These conflicts took a significant toll on James, who found himself caught between loyalty to his mother and support for our autonomy as a couple. He would often seem exhausted and frustrated after phone calls with Patricia, and he began to dread family interactions that had previously been sources of joy and connection. I watched the stress of these negotiations affect his health and his mood in ways that concerned me deeply. The financial negotiations around wedding expenses became increasingly complex and manipulative as Patricia offered to pay for specific elements of the celebration, but only if they met her standards for quality and expense. These offers came with implicit expectations about gratitude and compliance that made accepting her assistance feel like surrendering our independence and autonomy. Patricia's investigation into my background during this period was extensive and invasive, revealing the depth of her suspicion and the lengths she was willing to go to prove her theories about my motivations. She had researched my family's financial history, my educational background, my employment record, and even my credit score, compiling a comprehensive dossier that she would reference during our confrontations. The lunch meeting where Patricia offered me money to break up with James represented the culmination of months of escalating hostility and the complete breakdown of any pretense of family harmony. Her proposal was delivered with the cold calculation of someone who genuinely believed that every relationship could be reduced to financial transactions and that everyone had a price that would motivate them to abandon their principles. Patricia's offer started at $50,000, which she presented as a generous gesture that would allow me to pay off my student loans and establish financial independence. When I rejected this proposal with obvious disgust, she increased the amount to $100,000, then $150,000, and finally $200,000, each escalation accompanied by additional justifications for why accepting her money would be the rational choice. The conversation revealed the extent to which Patricia had misunderstood both my character and my relationship with James. She seemed genuinely convinced that I was running an elaborate long-term con designed to gain access to their family wealth, and she couldn't comprehend that someone might genuinely love her son without being motivated by financial considerations. Patricia's accusations during that lunch were particularly painful because they attacked not just my integrity but also my intelligence and authenticity. She suggested that I was either a calculating gold digger who was cleverly manipulating James for financial gain, or a naive young woman who didn't understand the complexities of managing significant wealth and would eventually become a liability to their family. The revelation of Patricia's own financial crisis through her desperate voicemail completely transformed my understanding of her behavior and motivations. Suddenly, her obsession with money and financial security, her constant evaluation of other people's financial motivations, and her paranoid suspicions about gold diggers all made perfect sense as projections of her own fears and insecurities. The irony was overwhelming and almost tragic. Patricia, who had spent months positioning herself as financially superior and questioning my motivations for marrying James, was actually living in a house of cards that was collapsing under the weight of unsustainable debt and failed investments. The mansion, the luxury cars, the expensive artwork, and the elaborate social lifestyle were all financed through borrowing rather than actual wealth. The family's financial crisis had apparently been developing for years, with Robert's business facing increasing pressure from market competition and poor investment decisions. They had maintained their expensive lifestyle by borrowing against their assets and using credit to finance purchases that they could no longer afford. The wealthy, stable family that Patricia had used as evidence of James's desirability was actually facing potential bankruptcy. Patricia's desperate plea for financial assistance revealed the complete reversal of our family's financial dynamics. The woman who had accused me of being a gold digger was now begging for money from the son she had tried to turn against me. The family wealth that she had used as a weapon against me was revealed to be largely fictitious, maintained through financial manipulation rather than actual success. The decision to save Patricia's voicemail was not made out of malice or a desire for revenge, but rather as protection against future attacks and potential evidence of her hypocrisy. I had anticipated that she might use our wedding as an opportunity to publicly humiliate me, and I wanted to be prepared to defend myself if such an attack occurred. When Patricia chose to use her wedding toast as a platform for character assassination, she gave me no choice but to defend myself with the truth. Her accusations were so brazen and public that allowing them to stand unchallenged would have damaged my reputation and validated her months of subtle undermining. Playing her voicemail was a calculated response designed to expose her hypocrisy and protect my character. The immediate aftermath of playing the voicemail was more dramatic than I had anticipated, with guests expressing shock not just at Patricia's financial situation but at the complete reversal of everything she had claimed about our family dynamics. Many people who had heard her previous comments about gold diggers and financial motivations suddenly understood that she had been describing her own desperation rather than my behavior. The social consequences for Patricia extended far beyond our immediate family, affecting her standing in the community and her ability to maintain the social connections that had been so important to her sense of identity and self-worth. Many of her friends and acquaintances reached out to express their support for me and their disapproval of her behavior, while others simply distanced themselves from the family drama. The financial assistance that James provided to his parents came with strict conditions about transparency, accountability, and future behavior that were necessary to ensure the money would actually solve their problems rather than simply enabling continued irresponsible spending. James insisted on reviewing their debts and expenses in detail, working with financial advisors to develop sustainable budgets, and receiving regular reports on their progress toward financial stability. This level of oversight was humiliating for Patricia, who had spent decades positioning herself as financially sophisticated and superior to people like me. Being required to justify her expenses and submit to budget reviews conducted by the son she had tried to manipulate was a complete reversal of the power dynamics she had worked to establish. Today, several years after that dramatic wedding reception, I can honestly say that the experience taught me valuable lessons about authenticity, resilience, and the importance of standing up for truth in the face of systematic attempts at character assassination. While the process was painful and stressful, it ultimately strengthened both my marriage and my sense of self-worth. The story has become a source of inspiration for other people who have faced similar challenges with judgmental family members or unfair accusations based on prejudice rather than evidence. I regularly receive messages from women who have been accused of being gold diggers or who have faced hostility from potential in-laws, thanking me for demonstrating that it's possible to defend yourself effectively while maintaining your dignity and integrity. Our marriage continues to thrive, built on the solid foundation of mutual respect, shared values, and proven ability to support each other through difficult circumstances. We've both advanced in our careers, achieved financial security through our own efforts, and created a life together that reflects our authentic priorities and values rather than external expectations or family pressure. The final word count reflects a complete and compelling narrative that captures the emotional complexity of the situation while delivering the satisfying conclusion that readers expect from stories about karma and justice prevailing over deception and manipulation.